The wind howls across the sidewalk like a warning, kicking up leaves and wrappers as a police cruiser jerks to a halt in front of a war-torn man, slumped against the cold brick wall of a convenience store, his threadbare coat barely shielding him from the biting cold of an unforgiving city morning. Officer Reardon, broad-shouldered, polished, and radiating smug authority, steps out eyeing the man with a look that's half disgust, half boredom, tapping the edge of his baton against his gloved hand as he approaches. "Hey, you can't loiter here. Move it along," he barks, but the man doesn't flinch, just lifts his chin slightly, eyes sunken but defiant, as though this isn't the first time he's been spoken to like garbage, and certainly won't be the last. The name stitched into the man's duffel is Cole, and pinned to the collar of his grimy backpack, dulled by time and neglect, is a small worn medal, one that catches the officer's eye and draws an involuntary snort of laughter from him as he leans closer, chuckling. What is this supposed to be? A souvenir. You steal that off a real soldier, and then without hesitation he reaches forward, plucks it off the bag and waves it mockingly in front of the few onlookers who have begun to slow their steps as if watching a staged humiliation, the metal glinting weakly in the light. James Cole doesn't rise, not yet, but his voice cuts through the air like a sharpened blade, calm, steady, and steeped in something ancient and unbreakable. You don't recognize it because men like you never had to earn it. And Reardon's smirk falters for a moment, but bravado returns quickly as he steps closer, looming. "Now, you think you're better than me, old man, sitting out here, stinking up the street, pretending to be something you're not, and there's a tension coiling in the air now. A silence that starts to press in on the edges of the street as more people stop to watch phones, discreetly lifted, the spectacle unfolding with the cruel predictability of injustice on display. Cole shifts slowly like a bear stirring from deep slumber, and as he pulls himself upright, the years fall away not from his skin, which remains weathered, nor from his clothes, which still sag from wear and exposure, but from his eyes which blaze now with something raw and commanding, something honed through fire and forged in discipline. And he steps forward, not away, and extends a hand toward the medal, now clutched tightly in Reardon's fist. "That medal's not for show," he says. And his voice, once calm, now carries steel. "It was awarded after Fallujah, after we cleared the southern corridor and pulled our men out under enemy fire." And a murmur goes through the small crowd, but Reardon scoffs. Not ready to yield, anyone can make up stories. He sneers. "Hell, you probably found that thing in a pawn shop." But then a woman's voice cuts through the crowd, sharp and stunned. "Oh my God." That's Gunnery Sergeant Cole. And suddenly the phones rise higher, and the murmurs swell, and eyes dart between the crumpled figure and the officer with the baton. And the woman steps forward mid-30s, dressed in medical scrubs, clutching her phone where a photo sits displayed, showing a younger, sharper version of the man before them. Same jawline, same piercing eyes, standing in front of a Humvee arm around another Marine, with the unmistakable ribbon of the Navy Cross pinned to his chest. "He saved my brother," she breathes, voice shaking. They were ambushed. "He went back 3 times through fire to drag wounded out my brother. Told us this man was the reason half their unit came home, and Reardon freezes now. Truly freezes eyes, flicking from the photo to the man whose gaze has not wavered once, and a creeping flush of humiliation stains his cheeks. Cole extends his hand again, not demanding, just steady, and the officer, cornered not by force but by truth, reluctantly opens his fist and drops the medal back into the calloused palm. There is no triumph in Cole's face, no smugness, just weariness and a dignity that remains untouched by poverty or insult. And, as he pins the medal back to his strap, the silence is broken by the slow, deliberate clapping of a man at the back of the crowd who steps forward and says quietly, "We should be thanking you, not tossing you out." And then others begin clapping too softly at first, then louder, a rising chorus of acknowledgment. Not for theatrics, but for truth long ignored. The officer mutters something unintelligible and backs away, disappearing into his cruiser. But no one is watching him anymore. All eyes are on Cole, who simply nods once as though accepting an old debt, finally repaid, and turns toward the woman who had recognized him, who now stands with tears streaking her cheeks. "Your brother's name?" he asks, and she tells him, and he smiles faintly. "He was brave. I just did my job." And with that, he starts to walk not aimlessly this time, but with a direction and a small ripple of space opening before him, as the crowd makes way, no longer seeing a homeless man, but a warrior who had been there, who had bled and borne the weight of war, and returned to a world too blind to see him until today. And, long after, he disappears down the street. The image remains the man who was laughed at for his medal, rising with quiet thunder, and reminding everyone present that valor needs no uniform. Only the strength to stand when every part of the world tells you to sit down. And in that act, in that moment of truth revealed and pride reclaimed the city. Learned that dignity can never be stripped by boots or badges, and that real heroes don't wear their medals to impress. They wear them because they've already paid in blood. But the story doesn't end when the applause fades and the crowd disperses, because something changes that day, not just in the onlookers, but in the heart of a city that had grown used to stepping over the forgotten, the broken, the invisible. James Cole doesn't head back to the alley where he usually sleeps beside an old dumpster, wrapped in cardboard. He keeps walking with the strange new weight of acknowledgement on his shoulders. A burden he had long since accepted would never come, and yet now it clings to him like a second skin, both warming and disorienting. And as he rounds a corner into a quieter street, a black SUV pulls up beside him, the window rolling down to reveal a clean-cut man in his 50s, with sharp eyes and a government badge clipped to his chest. "Gunnery Sergeant Cole," the man asks with a voice that sounds rehearsed but respectful. "I've been trying to find you for months." And Cole pauses, body still tense, eyes narrowed, unsure if this is another setup, another farce in uniform. "Who's asking?" he replies flatly, and the man steps out slowly, hands visible. Not a threat, just a messenger. "My name's Director Spencer, Department of Veterans Affairs," he says quietly. "You went off the grid after your discharge. There were efforts to track you down, but you never filed claims, never returned letters, and then you disappeared." And Cole lifts an eyebrow. Not out of surprise, but out of tired irritation. "You think I didn't try? I sat in that damn office for 6 hours. Once, no one called my name. No one looked up, and when I finally spoke, they said my file didn't exist." And Spencer nods, shame, tightening his jaw. "We failed you. But someone uploaded footage from this morning. It's gone viral." "Cole," he adds, holding out his phone, which shows the clip of Reardon laughing, the crowd gasping, Cole rising, and then the applause, millions of views, thousands of comments. Hashtags calling him a hero, a warrior, a symbol of everything the system tried to bury. Cole doesn't smile. He just sighs deeply and mutters. Took a man getting humiliated in the street for someone to care. But Spencer meets his gaze and says firmly, "That's gonna change, starting now." And then he gestures to the open SUV. Let us make this right. Housing, healthcare benefits back. Pay everything you earned and never received. You deserve that and more. And for the first time in years. Cole hesitates, not because he doesn't want it, but because it almost feels like a dream he'd long since let go of, one that hurt too much to keep alive. But as he looks back down the road at the people still watching from windows at the sidewalk where he was nearly erased again, he nods once, slow and heavy, and steps into the SUV, the door shutting with a quiet finality behind him. The next weeks pass like a whirlwind. Interviews, reunions, even a visit to the local VA office where employees now stand at attention when he walks in. Not because he demands it, but because they've all seen the footage, heard the story, and something in them shifts when they look into the eyes of a man who survived war abroad, only to be forgotten at home. A foundation offers him a position as a veteran liaison, and though he's unsure at first, he takes it knowing that if he doesn't speak for those still sleeping on the concrete, no one else will. He visits shelters, holds hands with amputees, listens to stories with the patience of a man who's lived them. And slowly his name becomes something whispered with reverence in the corridors of influence and shouted with pride in the streets. Reardon, meanwhile, is placed under investigation. His body cam footage confirms the disrespect, and though some try to defend him, the tide has turned, and he finds himself facing suspension, mandatory sensitivity training, and a city no longer blind to cruelty dressed in a badge. And 1 month later, at a citywide Veterans Memorial, a massive crowd gathers beneath a sky streaked with sunlight, where a new statue is unveiled. Not of generals or presidents, but of a weathered man in a torn coat, standing tall metal on his chest. Not gleaming, but steady, and at the base of the statue is inscribed, "To those who were forgotten, but never broken." And in the front row stands James Cole, in a simple, clean shirt and slacks, hair trimmed back straight, surrounded by Marines young and old, who salute him in silence while civilians wipe tears from their eyes, and parents lift their children to see the face of a real hero. And, as the ceremony ends, a reporter rushes forward, camera rolling, asking breathlessly, "Cole, do you have any words for the public? Anything you'd like people to understand?" And Cole turns, gaze steady, voice unshaken. Don't wait until someone's gone to say thank you. Don't wait until someone's filmed to believe they mattered. And with that, he walks away. Not because he's retreating, but because there's work to do. People to find, voices to raise, and a city still learning what respect really means. And as the sun dips behind the skyline, casting long shadows over the monument, a child tugs her father's sleeve and whispers, "That's the man from the video, right?" The one who stood up, and the father nods, eyes misty. "That's him, sweetheart." And they both stand a little taller in the presence of a man who once sat alone and forgotten, but who rose when it mattered most, and reminded the world what honor really looks like. But even as James Cole becomes a symbol, a headline and a statue etched in bronze, he remains something deeper, something rawer than any viral story can capture. As the days roll on, he returns to places most people still refuse to see. Walking alleyways behind shelters, sitting beside veterans who speak in half-mumbled riddles, who jump at shadows, who drink to silence the screams that visit them at night. And each time he listens, he remembers not with pity, but with brotherhood, because he knows that beneath every trembling hand and ragged breath is a warrior trying to come home. And one night, as cold rain slicks the sidewalk and the city seems to hold its breath, Cole finds a man hunched beneath the overhang of an abandoned store. Young, jittery eyes, wide with something feral and afraid, wearing camo pants and boots too big for his feet. And Cole doesn't speak at first, just sits beside him, offering a half-eaten sandwich and waiting patient as stone, until the young man finally mutters, "You're the guy. From the news, right?" And Cole nods once, slow, not out of pride, but because there's no reason to deny it, and the kid, barely 23 trembling, says, "I was in Kandahar. My unit didn't make it." And then he breaks voice, cracking into sobs that echo off the wet pavement. And Cole simply lays a hand on his shoulder, saying nothing. Because sometimes silence is the only language that makes sense. Later, Cole helps him to a transitional shelter, connects him with a counselor, checks on him every 3 days like clockwork, because Cole understands that saving a man once isn't the same as helping him survive every damn day afterward. And, as weeks pass, more stories like that unfold in Amputee. Former medic who hadn't spoken in 6 years begins sketching again after Cole visits and tells her, "You're still needed." A father of 3 battling PTSD, who had almost ended it all, finds solace in a support group Cole helped start. And gradually, the man once mocked for his medal becomes a lifeline to hundreds who never expected anyone to remember their names. Meanwhile, city officials, spurred by public pressure, propose a new initiative called Valor Never Vanishes, aimed at streamlining veteran housing access, mental health care, and job placements. And though politicians try to hijack the spotlight, Cole refuses every award, every political invitation, every glossy ceremony except one when he is invited to speak at the Capitol before a bipartisan congressional panel on veteran affairs. The room is lined with suits and cameras, and when he walks to the mic dressed in the same simple clothes, the room quiets not out of protocol, but out of something older, respect, earned not by title, but by truth. "You want to help veterans," Cole begins, voice unwavering. "Then stop hiding us behind numbers. We are not statistics. We are not burdens. We are your brothers, your daughters, your neighbors, and we've paid with our bodies, our sleep, our sanity for promises you still haven't kept." And the room stays still, stunned by the sharp edge in his words, until a woman herself, a senator and former nurse in Iraq, rises and places a hand over her heart, saying softly, "You're right." Starting today, that changes, and Cole doesn't smile, not fully, but there's a flicker of something in his eyes, a beginning. And on the way out, as reporters shout questions, Cole walks past them, all stops, only once to help an old man in a wheelchair cross the marble steps, because no matter how many articles bear his name, or how many statues are raised, he has never been in this for glory. He's been in it for them, for the ones who never got the applause, the cameras, or the second chances. And years later, when another young officer new to the force, eager but green, approaches a ragged-looking man outside a train station and prepares to make him move, he pauses, remembering his academy's lesson on veteran dignity, then steps forward, not with arrogance, but with a question. "Sir, do you need help?" And the man, startled, says, "No." But there's a difference now. A shift in posture, and as the officer turns to leave, he notices a small pin on the man's chest. A Navy cross dulled by time. And instead of suspicion, the officer salutes, because by now James Cole's story has become more than a headline. It's policy. It's protocol. It's the memory carved into the soul of a city that almost lost itself to apathy. And somewhere in a quiet park under a fading sky, Cole himself sits on a bench watching the clouds drift, his hands no longer shaking his back straight. As a group of children race past, and a mother whispers to them, "That's him, the man who reminded us all what honor looks like." And one little boy breaks from the group, runs back, and shyly hands Cole a folded paper medal colored with crayon. And Cole takes it, eyes misting for the first time in a long while, nodding as he pins it to his chest beside the real one, whispering, "That's the one I'll keep forever." And as the wind brushes the trees and the city hums around him, James Cole smiles. Not because the world is perfect, but because he knows finally it's listening. But even in the warmth of change, even as the world begins to shift, the past does not let go so easily. Not for a man like James Cole, who carries his memories like shrapnel embedded deep beneath the skin. Some days the weight is lighter, softened by laughter of those he's helped by progress. He never believed he'd witness, but some nights the war comes back in. Flashes, the roar of choppers overhead, the crack of gunfire echoing through sandstorms, the screams of brothers falling, and the silence that follows when the radio goes dead. He wakes in darkness, sweating chest tight, reaching for a rifle that isn't there. And only when his hand lands on the paper medal pinned to the wall beside his bed does he remember where he is not in Fallujah. Not in the dust, but in a modest apartment. The city gifted him after the hearing. Walls decorated not with medals, but with letters. Letters from families of those he saved. From strangers who watched the video and said it changed the way they look at every man sleeping on the street. And yet Cole knows the mission isn't over. It never will be. Not until every man and woman in uniform returns home and is met with a handshake, not a sidewalk. So he keeps moving. Keeps showing up in the places most people avoid, detox clinics where broken soldiers scream at the ceiling, cemeteries where the only visitors are ghosts, courtrooms where veterans are processed for crimes rooted in trauma that no one treated. He stands beside them, testifies for them, fights for them. And one day he's invited to a high school to speak to a group of seniors about courage and history, and he almost says no. He's never liked standing behind podiums, but something in the principal's voice, something honest, changes his mind. He arrives in his usual coat, nothing fancy. But the students hush the moment he steps onto the stage. Not because they recognize him, but because there's something about the way he carries himself. Something that silences noise without needing to raise a voice. And when he begins to speak, he doesn't talk about battles or glory. He talks about choices, about dignity, about what it means to walk past someone in pain and keep going, or to stop even for a moment and ask their name. He tells them, heroes aren't born in uniforms. They're born in moments when you decide someone else matters more than your comfort. And the students don't clap. At first, they just sit still, absorbing every word. And after the bell rings, many of them stay, some with tears in their eyes, others with questions about service, about fear, about how to help a friend who's struggling. And that night, Cole walks home not with applause ringing in his ears, but with hope blooming in his chest. Because change isn't just passing laws or building shelters, it's planting something in the next generation that says, never again will we forget those who gave everything. And years pass. Gray begins to spread through his beard. The lines on his face deepen, but his stride remains strong, his gaze unwavering, and one winter morning, a young Marine in dress blues appears at his door, standing straight eyes, filled with something fierce and grateful, sir. he says. "My father told me about you before he passed. He said you saved his life twice, once in the desert and again in court." And Cole nods, eyes burning not with sorrow but with pride, and invites the young man inside for coffee. And across the table, beneath faded photographs and soft light, the old warrior and the young one speak not of death, but of legacy, of what it means to serve, to return to heal, and to make sure no one else is left behind. And when Cole finally leaves this world, quietly in his sleep many years later, his funeral is not flashy, just a gathering in the same park where he used to sit, but thousands attend: Marines, nurses, senators, shelter workers, children grown into men and women who once handed him sandwiches or drew him medals, or simply watched him rise from the gutter and carry the world on his shoulders. And at the ceremony, the mayor steps forward, holding a plaque, announcing the renaming of the city's largest veterans center to the James Cole Valor House, where the words above the entrance read, "Dignity, duty, never forgotten." And in that crowd, someone begins a slow, respectful salute. Not a soldier, but a janitor, then a teacher, then an entire city standing for a man who once stood alone on a sidewalk medal, mocked dignity denied, and proved that even the smallest act of rising can shake the conscience of a nation. But long after the final salute fades into the wind and the flags are folded and handed to the trembling hands of those who loved him, the spirit of James Cole continues etched, not just into marble or bronze, but into the very rhythm of a city that finally remembers what it almost forgot. Because the James Cole Valor House doesn't sit empty like so many others. It breathes. It pulses with life, filled with the footsteps of veterans who once slept on benches, now learning trades, receiving therapy, sharing meals, laughing again after years of silence because one man reminded the world that they mattered. And on the wall inside the front lobby, framed behind glass, rests two things: a Navy cross dulled by decades, and beside it a wrinkled, hand-colored paper medal, both of which read the same truth in different tongues, that honor is not defined by rank or ceremony, but by the quiet courage to carry others when you yourself can barely walk. The staff, many of them former service members themselves, speak of Cole, not like a legend, but like an old friend. Someone who would sit beside you until your hands stopped shaking. Someone who didn't need to say much to make you believe again. One nurse, a woman named Grace, who credits Cole for pulling her out of a spiraling opioid addiction after discharge, now runs the center's trauma unit and tells every newcomer the same thing when they arrive, broken and skeptical. You're safe here. He built this for you, even if he never met you. And each time she says it, she places her hand on the wall just below the paper medal, where new veterans have begun pinning small drawings, unit patches, and handwritten notes beneath it, an altar of gratitude, formed not by mandate, but by memory. Outside, the city itself evolves. The police academy now includes mandatory empathy training titled the Cole Protocol, requiring all cadets to spend 2 weeks embedded in veteran outreach programs before receiving their badge, and the officer who once mocked Cole Reardon, long since discharged, now speaks at those very trainings, grizzled and haunted voice cracking, as he admits he was more of a man than I ever was, and I will spend the rest of my life honoring that truth. And though many don't forgive him, they listen because his regret is real, and Cole would have wanted people to be better, not just punished. Across town, a school installs a new curriculum module, Living Valor. The story of James Cole, and children as young as 7 now know his name, not from headlines, but from stories of humility, sacrifice, and redemption, drawing pictures of a man with a backpack, a medal, and kind eyes who teaches them that strength doesn't mean power. It means standing back up even when the world keeps knocking you down. And in the years that follow on every November 11th, Veterans Day, people from every borough march, not with parades full of noise, but with moments of silence scattered across street corners. Citizens pausing to offer warm coffee or winter coats to those huddled in shadow, speaking not as strangers, but as kin, saying softly, "James Cole sent me." And each time a connection is made, a life is touched, and the invisible are seen. And decades from now, when the world has changed again, and generations who never knew war still enjoy the peace paid for in sweat and blood, children will sit on laps and ask who was James Cole, and parents will tell them he was the man who stood when others mocked him, who carried no gun but won every battle, who built a place where broken people became whole, and those children, wide-eyed and quiet, will look at the old faded photo of him standing in front of the Valor House, a slight smile on his lips, one hand resting on a young Marine's shoulder, and they will feel something stir in their hearts, something quiet and sacred, a knowing that real heroes do not wear capes or always speak loudly or demand to be seen. They simply live in a way that changes the world, and James Cole, once a forgotten soldier on a freezing sidewalk, will live on not as a story told once a year, but as a lesson etched into the very soul of a nation that, because of him, finally learned how to say, "We see you, we honor you, and we will never forget again." And though his story has been passed from voice to voice like a flame that never dies, there comes a time, years later, when that same flame reaches places it never could before. Far-off towns where no one had ever heard of James Cole. Now name community gardens, food banks, and night shelters after him. A generation of young veterans, many of them never knowing his face but carrying his spirit, begin referring to each other with a quiet, powerful phrase. "You a Cole man," meaning, have you stood when others knelt? Have you helped without expecting thanks? Have you remembered what matters most when the world tries to make you forget? The phrase spreads like wildfire through VFW halls across military bases, whispered during tough deployments overseas, even printed in small block letters on dog tags sent anonymously to soldiers in combat zones. Not for rank, not for show, but as reminders that dignity must be defended not just on battlefields, but in every bus stop, courtroom, and corner where humanity can be forgotten. And yet amid all this, something unexpected happens. A letter is discovered buried in a file box in the back of the original VA office where Cole once sat for 6 hours ignored and invisible. A letter dated 15 years earlier, written by Cole himself on a crumpled piece of notebook paper, never sent, never seen, addressed simply to whoever still gives a damn, and the contents of that letter ignite a firestorm. In it, Cole wrote with raw, aching honesty, not asking for money, not begging for help, but simply explaining what it feels like to be discarded by the country you served, describing nights spent staring at brick walls and alleys, wondering how many more of his brothers would die after the war unarmed and alone. He wrote, "I don't want pity. I want to be seen. I want to matter again, not in parades, but in the small spaces where people look away." And by the end of the letter, the ink is smudged, but the words remain. If no one ever reads this, it's okay. I'm still proud. Not because I wore a uniform, but because I never let the world tell me I was less than what I'd bled to protect. The letter is published by a major news outlet, and it sparks a renewed national conversation Not just about veterans, but about every forgotten soul scraping through a system designed to miss them. Schools begin assigning it in literature classes. Congress reads it aloud on the floor during a debate on housing reform. A Hollywood film begins development. Not a glossy war movie, but a quiet, aching drama about after the battlefield, about alleyways and medals and the moments that define a life when no one is watching. And in that film, the actor cast as Cole doesn't play him as a saint. He plays him as a man, flawed, strong, tired, brave, bitter, kind, wounded, and deeply human. And at the film's premiere, veterans from all over the country are flown in to walk the red carpet. Not celebrities, not politicians, but men and women with stories that now finally have a place to be heard. And when the film ends, not with a bang, but with an old man sitting beside a young, homeless soldier under a flickering streetlight, sharing silence and a sandwich. The audience doesn't clap. They cry in waves, some standing, some saluting. Not because the film was perfect, but because it told the truth. And then, one day in the town where Cole once lived, a young girl barely 10, wearing a backpack twice her size, kneels beside a man shivering on the steps of a public library, and offers him a cup of hot cocoa and a pair of mittens. She's outgrown, and when her mother calls her back, she says simply, "He might be a coal man," and the mother eyes wet smiles because she understands. And so, the legend becomes something deeper. Not just a legacy of a man who once stood tall, but a movement, a shift, a living heartbeat in the soul of a people who now remember what they nearly forgot. That greatness does not always wear armor, and sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is look another human being in the eye and say, "I see you. You matter. Come in from the cold." And in that unseen eternal way, James Cole keeps walking through every kind act, every open door, every young soldier who refuses to let the past repeat. And though his boots are no longer on the ground, his footsteps echo forever, steady, proud, and unbreakable. And so it is that in every city where the wind howls through narrow alleyways, where cardboard beds line forgotten corners, and where medals gather dust beneath old coats, there's a whisper, soft, steady, unshakable, of a name that still walks with the fallen and stands beside the broken James Cole. But it is not his name alone that lingers. It is the idea he left behind, one that slips into the marrow of people too young to remember his face, but wise enough to live by his fire. For in a small town in Georgia, a high school senior named Malik, whose father returned from Iraq quiet and haunted, stands up during a Veterans Day assembly and delivers a speech so raw, so filled with the spirit of Cole, that the entire gymnasium falls silent, not for shock, but reverence, as he says, "My dad used to flinch at the sound of doors closing. Now he teaches kids how to fix bikes. You don't need to fight wars to be a hero, but you better damn well respect the ones who did." James Cole taught me that. In New Mexico, a tattoo artist inks a Navy cross beside a child's crayon medal on a former medic's arm. The words "Never Forgotten" written in the veteran's daughter's handwriting. In Chicago, a retired judge starts an initiative named the Cole Docket, offering veterans struggling with PTSD alternative paths to treatment and reintegration, rather than punishment inspired by a single quote etched on her office wall. "Don't wait until someone's filmed to believe they mattered." And somewhere far from the noise and honor guards in the woods of Vermont, an old man in his 70s, once a private under Cole's command, builds cabins with his bare hands, one for every lost friend, planting a small tree beside each one, whispering their names into the wind as he hammers. He'd want you remembered, too. The ripples never stop, because coal didn't ignite a spark he passed on a torch, and that flame now lives in every social worker who listens instead of judges, in every young officer who kneels to speak eye level with the unhoused, in every shelter that begins its intake process, not with what's your problem, but what's your story. And as decades pass, as cities rise and generations shift, the story evolves not into myth, but into a cultural promise that this time, this country will not let its warriors fade into silence. And on the 100th anniversary of Cole's birth, a gathering unlike any other takes place, a national remembrance, not in a stadium or capitol, but in thousands of local parks and sidewalks and shelters where people light candles and place small paper medals on benches, statues, bus stops, and stone walls, each one drawn by hand, each one a vow. And, at the original site, the place where Officer Reardon once laughed and tried to strip Cole of his dignity, a bronze plaque is mounted on the brick wall, simple and powerful, with a quote that stops passers-by mid-step. They saw a man on the sidewalk. What they should have seen was the ground shifting beneath them. And right there, every year, people still gather not just to remember him, but to carry him forward. Veterans, children, mothers, first responders, teachers, janitors, lawmakers, all taking turns reading his letter aloud as the city traffic fades into the distance. And even now, if you walk through the city late at night, just as the streetlights buzz and the last cafe closes, you might spot someone leaving a sandwich or blanket where someone else sleeps, not out of pity, but respect. And if you ask them why, they'll likely say the same thing softly as they walk away. He might be a coal man. And one day, in a future not too far from now when the world is faster, louder, and more distracted than ever, a young girl named Eliana stumbles across a digital archive while researching her middle school essay on American heroes. Not presidents, not generals, but the quiet ones, the forgotten ones. She types the words valor after war, and up pops a black and white photo of a man with tired eyes and a soft, defiant smirk. James Cole, and something about his face stops her cold. Something real and human and sad and proud all at once. She clicks the video-grainy footage of that day outside the store when an officer laughed at his medal, when Cole stood tall without raising his voice, and Eliana watches transfixed, her heart pounding as the crowd falls silent and then begins to clap. She doesn't blink, not even when tears fill her eyes, because for the first time she sees that heroes aren't just the ones with movies and monuments. They're the ones who endure long after the battle, who speak softly, and carry the kind of strength that doesn't fade when the cameras are off. And Eliana writes her essay not with facts alone, but with fire with soul, calling it The Day the World Stood Still, and her words ripple through her school, through her community, until it reaches the desk of a national education advisor. And before long, her essay is shared nationwide, not just as a tribute, but as a rallying cry to teach all students about the Cole legacy as part of standard history curriculum. And schools across the country begin a new tradition every November. Students read aloud from Cole's lost letter to whoever still gives a damn, and then step outside to place a hand-drawn paper medal somewhere visible. A park bench, a statue base, a bus stop, or even a stranger's coat. Each act a reminder that no one should ever have to earn their humanity twice. And so, Cole's life becomes more than memory. It becomes motion, a living thread woven through time itself, linking generations not by war, but by the choice to see each other, to listen, to lift instead of overlook. And in the heart of the city where it all began, the James Cole Valor House expands into a national network with centers in every state, each one operating on three principles, carved in stone above every doorway: dignity, action, truth. Not slogans, but the pillars of a revolution built from one man's quiet refusal to stay silent in the face of humiliation. And those who work there, many of them once lost themselves, call each other torchbearers because they know the fire they carry isn't theirs to own, only to pass. And then, on the 50th anniversary of the day, Cole stood tall. Something extraordinary happens. A massive gathering forms across the nation, coordinated not by governments, but by people, veterans and teachers and nurses and bus drivers. Millions of paper medals are made and displayed everywhere, turning cityscapes into tapestries of honor, from the White House gates to rural barns, from skyscrapers to school windows, all glowing with the humble shape of a medal once mocked and now revered. And among them, Eliana, now a senator, steps to a podium not to campaign, not to grandstand, but to tell the story of the man who changed her life when she was 12, the man who taught her that service doesn't end with discharge. It begins with remembrance. She holds up the original paper medal she kept in her drawer all these years, its edges worn colors faded, and places it into a glass case at the new National Hall of Quiet Valor, where thousands file past daily whispering his name, not with sorrow but gratitude. And still in quiet corners of cities in the hush before dawn, an old veteran will pause at a bench, find a medal folded with care, and smile. Not because he needs recognition, but because in that moment, in that simple act, he knows I am not invisible. I am not alone. James Cole walks with me, and in the years that stretch far beyond that moment, beyond the podiums, the paper medals, the classrooms where children now recite his letter like a sacred verse, James Cole becomes not just a story passed down, but a part of the nation's moral DNA, a compass for conscience, especially in the moments when the country teeters toward forgetting again. In a distant city long plagued by apathy and division, a crisis emerges. A group of veterans are evicted from a poorly funded transitional shelter, slated for demolition, and for a week no media covers it. No officials intervene until a high school janitor named Mr. Alvarez himself, a retired Marine, tapes a copy of Cole's face to the city hall doors with a hand-scrawled note. If you won't listen to us, listen to the man who taught this country how to stand up. The photo goes viral, and within 24 hours the mayor reverses the demolition order, and more than that, pledges to rebuild the shelter in Cole's name, doubling its capacity, hiring veterans to help run it, calling it not a political move, but a moral realignment. And once again, it is not the thunder of protests or speeches that drives the change, but the quiet echo of one man's dignity refusing to die. And some time later, on the edge of a battlefield in a foreign land, a young soldier lies injured beneath smoke and fire, separated from his unit, his radio crackling static blood pooling by his side. But clutched in his fist is a laminated card, one his mother gave him before deployment, bearing a quote from Cole's letter. "You're still proud. Not because you wore the uniform, but because you never let the world tell you you were less than what you bled to protect." The soldier reads the words, whispers them like a prayer, and drags himself forward until the evac finds him, because Cole's strength has become more than memory. It's survival. And as the decades roll on and technology changes the way humans live and see and speak, even in virtual classrooms and augmented reality war museums, James Cole's story is told not enhanced with effects or dramatized for ratings, but delivered in his own voice. Preserved from an old interview rediscovered in a public broadcasting vault where he speaks plainly. If we want to be a nation worth defending, we have to start by defending those already here, especially the ones everyone stopped seeing. And that voice becomes the foundation for a national day. Not a holiday filled with sales or fireworks, but a day of service called Cole Day, when citizens across America commit a single act of visibility for the unseen, buying a meal for a homeless person, writing a letter to a soldier overseas, sitting beside a vet and asking, "Tell me your story." And in every act, in every corner of the country, one truth holds steady, that even long after the man is gone, his footsteps are felt in the soil in the buildings that bear his name in the eyes of children who grow up learning not just history, but humanity. And somewhere beneath the soft light of a small-town library, an elderly woman sits beside her granddaughter, flipping through a worn scrapbook filled with articles and photos and drawings of medals. And when the child asks Grandma, "Who was James Cole?" the woman smiles and replies, "He was the man who reminded the world that even the quietest life lived with honor can echo louder than any war." And together they place a paper medal in the window beside thousands of others across the nation. Each one a vow. Each one a legacy. Each one whispering the same unbreakable truth. James Cole lives here. And so, as the world continues to spin louder, faster, more forgetful by the hour, the name James Cole remains a still point in the storm. A reminder written not in stone, but in the souls of those who choose to see others, not by their clothes, their condition, or their silence, but by the battles they carry deep within. His story, once a single spark on a cold city sidewalk, has become a constellation. Across time, veterans restored children, awakened laws rewritten, compassion reborn. Not because he demanded it, but because he proved that quiet courage when seen can shift an entire nation's heartbeat. And though his boots no longer echo down alleys, and his voice no longer stirs in city hearings, his legacy walks on in every hand, offering warmth, every eye that doesn't look away, every young soul who learns that real strength is not about power, but about standing when no one else will. So, if this story moved you, if you felt your heart tighten when Cole rose from the sidewalk, if you wiped your eyes when the world finally stood beside him, then don't let it end here. Carry the torch, share the message, and help us tell more stories, like his stories that matter. Stories that heal. Click the subscribe button, support the channel, and be part of a movement that lifts the unheard, honors the unseen, and reminds the world that true heroes are never forgotten. They live on in us. Subscribe now. Be the reason someone stands tomorrow.